What's up, guys? This is a stick figure historian, and welcome to another episode of the Scotland series. And guess what? We're actually going to Scotland today! So, just to recap, in the last episode, King Louis XV of France gave Prince Charles a fleet to go to Britain and fight for his crown. But a storm kind of blew the whole thing over. And after that, Louis pretty much quit on Charles because it wasn't really politically convenient to help him anymore. So we left the prince pretty much just gadding about Paris. It was then Sir Thomas Sheridan, who was perhaps one of the most instrumental men in spurring Prince Charles to action of his own. He was an Anglo-Irishman, which Anglo just means English, so Anglo-Irish just means Sheridan was of both English and Irish descent. He had worked bravely as a courier in the Jacobite Rising of 1715. Afterwards, he was appointed by the would-be James III as one of the governors of young Prince Charles. Sheridan often handled the Jacobite correspondence between Britain and France, and he had firm reason to believe that the Scots, particularly the Highland clans, were ready and willing to support Prince Charles, should he land and make an effort to win his crown. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Scottish geography, here's a map roughly showing the area that is generally called the Highlands. Sheridan told Charles this and urged him to leave his forlorn hopes in France and make a foray on his own. These words were further supported by a petition that arrived from one Sir Hector MacLean, literally begging Charles to come to Scotland. He promised at least 5,000 men of his clan and others were ready to arm and fight for the Stuart cause. More encouragement came by way of several songs, written by a Jacobite named Alastair MacMaster Alastair. In these songs, the people of Scotland rejoiced as Prince Charles came to fight for them against the usurping King George. They were well written and fiery, and they stirred the heart of the prince as they were read to him. Finally, too, the war in Europe over Austria had roiled over again. The fragile peace between France and Britain had shattered, and the French had just won a great victory against them at the Battle of Fontenoy, due in part to the help of a small regiment of Scotsmen. Truly, then, George II was not invincible. All of these things conspired to embolden Charles, and at last he purposed in his heart to go. Money was, of course, the first thing he needed. Of this, he had quite literally less than nothing. He must take out another loan. He went to two Parisian bankers, John and George Waters, and negotiated to borrow the massive sum of 180,000 livres. As security, he was forced to put up the most valuable things he owned: the crown jewels of his great-grandfather, King John III of Poland. With this wealth, Charles purchased two ships: the Elizabeth, a man of war, and the Teillay, a privateer. These he loaded with rifles, swords, and ammunition, among other things that soldiers might find valuable in a brilliant campaign. On the 5th of July, they launched from the French coast out into the waves of the Atlantic. The plan was to make their way to the western shore of Scotland by way of the Celtic Sea. This way they would bypass the rigorously guarded English Channel and land directly in the region of the country where they were sure to find the most enthusiastic support. As it happens, these waters, too, were not left untended by their foes. The HMS Lion spotted them and straightway bore down to make an attack. The Elizabeth swung around to meet the Lion, thus protecting the Teillay and the prince aboard her, and allowing the smaller vessel to escape. Charles anxiously watched the naval battle growing smaller and smaller behind him. In the end, the French ship triumphed over the Lion, but she was so badly damaged that she was forced to turn around and go back to France, taking almost all of Charles's war supplies with her. The Teillay must go on alone. Thankfully, there were no more English ships to be met with, and Charles set foot safely on the rocky island of Eriskay on the 23rd of July. And you can see Eriskay here on the map. It's this little bitty island in the portion of Scotland known as the Hebrides. There were several companions that disembarked with the prince that day, but only a handful of them are ever noted by name. These are often called the 7 Men of Moidart, and I believe it will be of interest to explore their characters briefly. And if you're wondering what's up with the name Moidart, I'll explain that here in an upcoming episode. For now, let's just look at the guys. The eldest was William Murray, the Marquis of Tullibardine. He was a staunch Jacobite and friend of James III. In his younger years, he had fought in the unsuccessful rising of 1715, and ever since had lived in penurious exile on the continent, surviving off of what little his family in Scotland could smuggle away to support him. George Kelly, secondly, and he not nearly as impressive a figure as the first. Kelly was a Protestant clergyman who had tried his hand in a brief Jacobite scheme in 1722, known as the Atterbury Plot. When it all came to naught, he was locked away in the Tower of London. Somehow or another, he had escaped and made his way to Rome. He was a shifty character of bad morals and widely distrusted by his fellows, including even James. Francis Strickland was another companion. Like Murray, he had fought in the Rising of 1715, and from there had gone on to fight as a sort of mercenary for various rulers of Europe. James III greatly disliked Strickland, however, for he had tried to persuade young Charles to convert to the Anglican Church in order to gain the greater support of the English. In fact, James was so distressed when he learned that Strickland had accompanied the prince to Scotland that he wrote immediately to Charles to have the man discharged from his service. Though this was never done. It was fitting that Sir Thomas Sheridan should be there, as one of the greatest instigators of this expedition. He obviously enjoyed a close relationship with the prince, having acted as his friend and governor through his youth. And we know already that Sheridan had lent his services as a courier to Charles's father so many years before. Sir John Macdonald is another name that is given to us, though of him we know quite little. The other men I have mentioned were all in their 50s, But MacDonald's age is as mysterious as his life story. But, if he was old, I'm pretty sure we can all give a pretty good guess at what he did for a living. You never know. He really could be the famous old MacDonald. But in all seriousness, all we really know of him is that he was Irish by birth, and that he had spent some time in Europe as a mercenary. Another Sir John William O'Sullivan, follows. An Irish mercenary like the first John, and of the age of about 45. He had been chosen for his experience in guerrilla warfare during a campaign he had fought in on the Italian island of Corsica. No doubt such experience would come in handy when fighting on the boggy, irregular ground of the Highlands, with only a few against the very many. And lastly came Aeneas MacDonald, a Scots-French banker that had been of great help to Charles in procuring funding for this brave enterprise. He had helped in other ways than funding as well, for it was him who had first introduced Charles to the poetry of Alastair Maester Alastair. He was only 30, much closer in age to the prince than the other 6 companions. But that is enough of the others. In the next episode, we will return to the prince, and what he found upon landing at Eriskay.
The news frae Moidart cam yestreen will soon gar money fairly, for ships o' war hae just come in, and landed Royal Charlie. Come through the heather, around him gather, you're a' the welcome early. Around him cling we all your kin, for wha'll be king but Charlie. Come through the heather, around him gather, come Ronald, come Donald, come all together, and crown your rightful lawful king, for wha'll be king